welcome. Today, we're jumping right into a pretty incredible story. Think high-stakes courtroom drama, but from the 7th century. It's all about a group of refugees who have to defend their entire community in front of a foreign king. And guess what? All they've got are their words. So, that really was the question, wasn't it? Could words alone be enough to save them from being sent back to their persecutors? I mean, their lives, the future of their entire community. It all literally came down to one person making one speech. All right, so let's set the scene. We're in 7th century Mecca. Now, this city is basically run by one powerful tribe, the Quraysh, and a new community of Muslims has emerged, right? Their message? Well, it challenged the whole social and economic setup, and that led to some really intense persecution. It got so bad, so unbearable, that they had to make a huge decision. They had to get out. So a small group went first, kind of like a scouting party, and they confirmed there was a safe place to go. And then a much bigger wave of people followed. We're talking over 80 men and women. Now, you have to understand, in the tribal society of Mecca back then, this was a huge deal. A massive, unprecedented exodus. And for the rulers of Mecca, it was a major, major embarrassment. So where were they headed? To Abyssinia, which we know today as Ethiopia. It was a kingdom ruled by a Christian king, the Najashi. And this king had a serious reputation. He was known far and wide as a fair and just ruler. And frankly, that reputation was pretty much everything these refugees were counting on. And you know what? Their bet paid off. In Abyssinia, they found exactly what they were looking for: safety. They could finally practice their faith without being harassed. One of the migrants, a woman named Salama, even said that they didn't hear a single insult directed at them. Think about that. After everything they'd been through, they had finally found peace. But of course, that peace wasn't going to last. Back in Mecca, their persecutors, the Quraysh, were absolutely furious. They just couldn't stand seeing these people living freely and peacefully. They saw it as a threat to their own power, and so they cooked up a plan to drag every single one of them back. So the Quraysh sent 2 of their sharpest guys for the job, including the very cunning Amr ibn al-As. And their strategy was pretty ruthless, a classic 2-step approach. First, you soften up the court. They brought all these expensive gifts, fine leather goods, to bribe the king's ministers and get them on their side. And then, step 2, you go straight to the king and just slander the refugees. So picture this. They're in the king's court, and the emissaries lay out their case. They basically paint the Muslims as these foolish young kids, rebels who've abandoned their ancestors and cooked up some weird new religion that disrespects everybody, Mecca's gods, even Abyssinian Christianity. Their whole argument boiled down to, hey, they're our people. We know them best. We know all their faults. Just give them back to us. And at first, it looks like the plan is working like a charm. The ministers, with their pockets full of expensive leather, all start nodding along, telling the king, yeah, they're right. These people are outsiders. Just send them back to their own folks. It seemed like an open and shut case, right? Well, not quite. Because this is where the Najashi really lived up to his reputation. He just flat out refused to be pushed around by bribes or political games. He basically said, no way. These people came to my country seeking protection. The very least I can do is hear what they have to say. He was not about to make a decision like this without hearing both sides. So can you imagine? The refugees, probably terrified, get summoned to the palace. They have to pick someone to speak for all of them, and they choose a man named Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. What he's about to say, well, it's a defense that people would still be talking about centuries later. Ja'far's strategy here was just brilliant. He doesn't get into politics at all. Instead, he speaks directly to the king's sense of morality. He paints this picture of before and after. Before, he says, we were a people who worshipped idols, we were immoral, we broke family ties, the strong preyed on the weak. But now, he explains, this new message has taught us to worship one God, to be truthful, to keep our promises, to be kind to our neighbors. It was a genius move, an appeal to shared values that he knew this Christian king would totally understand. And it worked. The king was clearly moved. He asked Ja'far, can you share some of what has been revealed to you? Now, this is a critical moment, and Ja'far makes an incredibly smart choice. He decides to recite from a chapter in the Quran called Maryam, or Mary, which is all about the story of the Virgin Mary and the miraculous birth of Jesus. And as Ja'far recited these verses, something amazing happened. The king and his priests, They actually started to weep. Then Najashi immediately saw the connection, declaring, and this is incredible, by God, this and what Jesus brought have come from the very same source of light. And just like that, he tells the Meccan envoys to get lost. The Muslims were safe. For now. But Amr ibn al-As wasn't going to give up that easily. He was defeated, but he had one last card to play. The very next day, he goes back to the king and says, "Wait, you don't know the whole story. These people say something terrible about Jesus Christ." He accuses them of blasphemy. This was his final gambit, a direct attack on the king's own faith designed to corner him. So, the Muslims are called back to the court. You can only imagine the fear they must have felt. This time, it wasn't a general hearing. It was about one very specific, very dangerous theological question. And they knew that the wrong answer could get them all sent back, or worse. The pressure was immense, but Jafar and the Muslims had decided they were just going to tell the truth, whatever the outcome. So when the king asks them what they believe about Jesus, Jafar states it plainly and respectfully. He says, "We believe he is God's servant, his messenger, and his word which he bestowed upon the Virgin Mary." He didn't attack the king's beliefs, he just stated his own, calmly and clearly. And what happened next is just, wow. A truly stunning moment. The Najashi leans down, picks up a little twig from the floor, and holds it up. And he says, "What you have just said does not exceed what Jesus Christ said by this much, by the width of a twig." He was basically saying their belief was perfectly in line with the true teachings of Jesus. Just incredible. And that was it. Game over. The verdict was final. The Quraysh envoys were completely humiliated. The king ordered every single one of their expensive gifts, all that leather, to be returned to them. It was a complete and total rejection of their entire scheme. The Muslims, they were granted full protection, and they stayed there, living in peace for many, many years. So you see, this whole courtroom drama became so much more than just one historical event. It really set a powerful precedent for generations. It's this amazing model for interfaith dialogue, a story about seeking refuge from persecution, and just a timeless victory for truth and justice over political pressure and bribery. And of course, a testament to what real courageous leadership looks like. And all of this really leaves us with a pretty big question to think about, doesn't it? In a world that's still filled with political pressure, with bribes, with powerful people trying to influence decisions, what does it actually take for a leader to tune all of that out and choose to stand up for what's just and right?